Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. In what's becoming a trend, we've got Mico back acting as host, and we're going to talk about one of the great pilgrimages on earth, the Via Francigena, the most well-known parts in Italy, but it actually starts in England. Mico, welcome back. Thanks for doing this. I'm excited to talk about this trip.
Thanks so much, Richard. I'm glad to be back on. I'm excited to be switching seats again and to talk to you about this hike today, or the long walk, the Via Francigena. I apologize if I'm going to mispronounce that, but I've heard a lot about it, and I saw your photos from when you did the hike. I think, what was that? Maybe 4 months ago, and they looked incredible. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it, because I think this is one of those more lesser known treks in Europe, but I think it'll quickly start climbing the ranks once more and more people learn about it.
Yeah, and don't worry about saying it wrong. I spent a decade calling it the Via Francigena, or maybe 2 decades, and it was only in the last kind of year I found out it's called Via Francigena. And yeah, I'm an old dog. It takes me a while. I still slip back to saying the wrong thing. So for all listeners, I'm sure I'll say it wrong. I apologize. It's the knowing French and reading it like thinking, how would I say it in French? That's what causes this mispronunciation again and again.
Awesome, Richard. Well, I'm not too worried about the full language lesson for today. Today, I want to learn more about the walk, and maybe let's kind of kick things off. If you could maybe just tell me a little bit of what actually is the Via Francigena, because in my mind, it's a long walk across Europe, or a portion of Europe, and I just know that has beautiful views and a lot of great food and culture along the way. So maybe can you tell me a little bit about what the walk is all about?
Yeah, so kind of the history is an Archbishop of Canterbury back in the 900s walked to the Vatican from Canterbury and took notes of where he stayed each night. And this was discovered, and basically tourism authorities kind of built or pieced together a route that you can walk the 3,000 kilometers from Canterbury to Rome. And it goes through as much of the original route as possible. Obviously, in the last 1,000+ years, it's changed. But there are plenty of times when you actually walk ancient Roman roads, which is kind of cool. Like they're so well built that here's 1,000 years later, these Roman roads have still survived. The most famous part, or the most popular part, starts at the Alps and goes south to the Vatican. And the most, even above that, it's the part that goes to Tuscany and Lazio. So the last kind of 3 weeks of the trip. That's what my wife and I just did, was essentially a town called Lucca near Florence, all the way to the Vatican in Rome. And yeah, what a trip.
And I know not too long ago, we talked about all the different hikes across Europe, and there are plenty to choose from. So what is it in particular about the Via Francigena that drew you to taking on the challenge?
Yeah, so I spent some time in Tuscany. I've had a few trips there, and the last one I did some cycling and a lot of hiking, and it just really blew me away. Just the quality of, walking through these beautiful vineyards and hills and these incredible towns. I was doing mostly day hikes, and so it had been on my radar. I want to go and do like a longer hike where I get to explore all these villages. Also, having 3 kids and running a company, life is busy. So the idea of a pilgrimage to kind of step away and go on this ancient route was also something that was important, and just, time for my wife and I. We don't get much time. We haven't had a 3-week vacation together since 2009. So just having 3 weeks without the kids in Italy with great food and great views, it just kind of all seemed to fit together. And then also, the last thing was the timing. We did this at the end of September and into October. We couldn't go into the Alps because it was snowy. In fact, last year we had the really early snow in August that caused huge chaos. So even if we had been able to move it a month earlier, the Alps would have been really difficult. So it was kind of just everything pushed us together to, go do this walk that's been on your radar for so long.
So let's talk a little bit more about the trail itself. Can you describe, what were you kind of walking on? Are you always on rocks? Are you always on dirt? Can you tell us a little bit about the difficulty and maybe just so I can picture a little bit more of myself on this trip, what kind of mileage were you racking up day to day?
So I guess I'll start with the kind of terrain is varied, although typically pretty hilly. And so lots of days between, 800 and I think our biggest day was 13 or 1400 meters of elevation gain. So that's around 3000 to 4500 feet of elevation gain. You think, oh,
Wow.
I'm in Tuscany, you know, like again, I'm coming from the Rockies where I'm like, we go up and down darn mountains. Like these hills aren't going to be a problem. So it is hilly. There's a little bit of road walking. There was less than I thought there would be. But there was a couple days where, you might spend 5 or 8 kilometers on a road. There was almost no road walking on busy roads. So even if you're walking on a road, you'd see cars like every minute or two, or maybe once every 15 minutes. There's one section that has a lot of cars where we just said, we're not going to walk that bit because there's no shoulder and it's a very busy road. And all the guidebooks and other pilgrims said, hey, if you can avoid that bit. So, it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. But then we also, in a previous podcast, I mentioned we tried, we were a bit arrogant, thinking, hey, we're from the mountains. And also we had a fixed timeline. We had to do it in 18 days. And that included, some time before in Florence and after in Rome. So we pushed ourselves harder. You can break the days up in a lot of cases. So you can make there be some really nice half days. And if I were to do it again, I would have said, listen, we got to find 3 or 4 more days and do some half days because unlike stuff in the mountains, just these little villages you go through are just so charming, and you just want to spend time in all of them. And you this is one where you probably don't want to push yourself as hard because the experience of these little villages and Tuscany as a whole, and Lazio is so special.
Yeah, it sounds like the difficulty itself is somewhat in your control because in my experience, I'm backpacking through, for example, the Canadian Rockies. I'm either staying here or I'm staying at the next campsite that I've booked, and there's nothing in between. So I gotta get going over there. And if I try to be a little bit ambitious at the time that I book it, I usually still regret it pretty quickly on the day of actual trekking. But here it sounds like you can kind of more or less customize your route, your itinerary, so that it works for you, whether you're on a tight timeline or you want to take your time. It sounds like you can kind of do a little bit of any type of difficulty you want. Now, I know there are a lot more long distance hikes in and around Europe. How would you think this Via Francigena would compare to those other ones that you've done in the past?
Yeah. So if you're used to doing mostly stuff in the mountains, this is more urban. You're going to go through a couple towns or villages every day. Whereas in mountains, you're almost always in nature. There's fewer, maybe no long climbs. If you think if you're in the Alps, you usually wake up, and if you're in a valley bottom, you spend the morning climbing up to a pass. You still do big days of 800, 1,000, 1,200 meters of elevation gain, but you're going up and down and up and down, and it's kind of like just punchy up and down. I don't know if I like that more or not because you could just kind of settle into 2 hours of an uphill grind. Whereas this,
Yeah.
you get 30 minutes of uphill and then you go downhill and it's like, you're never done. Whereas, in the mountains, you think, okay, we've finally gone up. Now we get to go down.
Yeah.
I think something else is the accommodations. So, because you're going through towns, you're going through, going past farms and vineyards, there's way more variety, of accommodations, and in general, better accommodations. We had, 2 places that are on my list of like my favorite places I've ever stayed, to the point that we were discussing like a family reunion, and I was going to go back to 2 of the places that I stayed at because they were just out of this world, and pretty affordable. It's not going to Rome is expensive these days. Going to Florence is expensive, but we were staying in some incredible places, and I thought it was really reasonable. And I think the last thing is there's more to see. Yes, you have beautiful hills and valleys and countryside, but you also have these, a ton of history, these architectural wonders, beautiful towns, there's just so much to see. And so it's a little bit different from just going to the Alps or going to the Rockies or going to the Himalayas, where it really is about the mountains.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating from, when I think about my experience hiking and backpacking, and because I feel like I'm always in nature, and a lot of times I find that the less people I see, the more it enhances my actual experience. But in this case, I almost feel like you've achieved the opposite with this kind of trail. You've kind of had something a little bit different in that, this maybe the urban setting that actually allows you to immerse more into the culture of the trail and the culture of the area and region, a bit more than if you were just kind of walking around and through nature completely alone. And I find that to be like a really alluring part of the this type of trail.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is compared to a Camino where you'll have, hundreds or thousands of people walking the exact same stage as you. I mentioned before, there was 13 people that were, on our stage. You'd probably see a half dozen of them each day, maybe. And so even though you go to these towns that were active and, would often have, they might be busy during the day, we had a lot of time, just my wife and I just walking and talking. And again, when you've got three rambunctious boys, we don't have much time to walk and talk. Where
Yeah.
this was really nice. And it wasn't, we didn't have to always be in groups and talking. And it's nice to meet other people, but we really just wanted to have some time to ourselves. And we were able to have that on the Francigena, where if we'd done a Camino, that would have been a lot more difficult just to have this special moment just as a couple.
No, it sounds like we're already kind of touching on it, but it sounds like you've had a really great and amazing time, really positive experience. Can you tell me a little bit of some of your kind of key memorable highlights that you look back fondly with the Via Francigena, just so I can picture for myself what I could achieve as well?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start with, you start in Florence, in the
Wow.
midpoint is Siena, you end in Rome. So if you've never been to Italy, you're going to hit these three incredible places. You're going to walk into and out of Siena. You're going to walk into Rome. You're going to walk down, from the mountain into the Vatican City. And then we walk to our hotel. There's something just super cool about walking into a city like Rome and like having spent 3 weeks walking. So I think just to see those three great cities is incredible. But what I really loved are the small towns along the way. So a lot of people have heard of San Gimignano, or San Jimmy as it's called for short. It's this spectacular town with these skyscrapers of, these slender towers that I guess the wealthy people used to keep their jewels at the top of these towers. And, they're incredible to see, this hilltop city with fortified walls. There's the Colle di Val d'Elsa, which was this incredible city with this beautiful bridge that connected, parts of the old town that's high on this bluff. And then you walk down into kind of like felt like maybe a 19th or 18th century city down below that was a bit more modern, but still really, really cool. There was this beautiful, smaller town, San Cherico d'Orsia, which just was charming. And, there was only 5 restaurants there, but it was, little narrow Italian streets. Radio Cofani, which was up high, a town called Monte Regione, which is a fortified city with like 4 hotels and 5 restaurants. And when you walk in, it's busy, and then everyone leaves, and you're just like in this hilltop. It feels like it's 500 years ago. And there was a city called Bolsena. I'd never heard of. So a lot of these cities I'd heard of, I'd never been to. I'd never even heard of Bolsena. It was out of this world. It's on this beautiful lake. It's got this castle on a hill. It's got these, those little alleys you want. In Bolsena, we stayed in a like a noble's home from the 16th century. It was like staying in a museum. I think it was like 120 euros a night. And like literally it's like staying in a living, working museum. And then we stayed in a couple agriturismos, which are like working farms. And these were near Bonconvento and Montefiascone, 2 really nice towns as well. But these agriturismos were just something out of this world. And, so to have these towns and explore them and, just to see them, and then combined with some really great hotels right near them, that was a really special aspect to that trip. Never mind the obvious, the food, eating Tuscan specialties in autumn,
Yep.
going
Hmm.
down into Lazio and Rome. I'm a coffee fan, and I like my pastries, as you can tell. So having a great coffee break, like we've all had our little breaks when we're hiking, and you take some water and some gummies. It's totally different than a perfectly made espresso. And like some days we'd have three, and some pastries. And then wherever you go, you have history and architecture. There's lots and lots of signs that explain the history. So it was fun just to read, oh, this was where the Florence army was battling the Roman nobility. And, here's where the Sienans were to come in. And you just would look around and think, man, there's so much history, and you could just read about it on signs. So it was just the memories of the accommodations, the places we visited. I in my friend, I said, oh, we should go back and do that again. And I'm like, there's a big world out there. Let's not do the exact same trip. But the fact that 4 months later, my wife wants to go back in, I think it's just such a testament to the beauty of Tuscany and Lazio.
Yeah, it really sounds like there's this whole other element of the walk. And again, I'm just drawing in some of my own experience hiking and backpacking across the Canadian Rockies. And I think of, you are consistently surrounded by nature, but in this walk, it almost sounds like there's this layer of tangibility that you can achieve on the trail when you're actually touching and feeling the architecture, the cobblestones below your feet. It seems like the history kind of comes to life, and you could really more easily visualize, the importance of the trail that you're walking on. Whereas I find some, other trails around the world that, there are interesting pieces of history, but, when you look out around you, you're just looking at nature. I mean, beautiful, mind you, but to have the architecture right in your face is amazing. And not to mention, we're not even talking about the coffees that you can get along the way. If I had a couple of those on some of my hikes, a couple well-timed ones, I probably could have gone a little further. But that is pretty awesome to hear. Now, I know it sounds like you've gone through so many different towns and cities, and I imagine the planning, the logistics of going town to town, it could be, I'm sure, a little bit hectic. Could you tell me a little bit about some of those challenges you had with planning the trip, the logistics, and maybe even, I imagine your resupply, because I doubt you're carrying everything with you, throughout the entire trip. I'm sure there's a couple tips you've got for somebody who hasn't done this yet.
Yeah. So one of the challenges is this is not like the Camino where there's so much accommodation. Some of the towns you go through like only have one hotel, and it's one of these little family-run 12-room hotels, which means getting accommodation, it's limited. Some of the Siena, there's tons of accommodation in Rome and Florence and Lucca and San Gimignano, there's tons of accommodation. You'll be okay. In summer, it might be tough, and in early September. But if you don't book it all in advance, it gets to be really challenging, and you can end up having some real long days or some real short days just because it's not abundant. In terms of supplies, we had very small packs. We didn't carry much. Because you're going through towns and villages and always finding restaurants or not as many supermarkets, but you'd find food you could eat, and so we didn't carry many supplies. Lots of water. That was sometimes difficult to find. One of our challenges was, I mentioned in a previous podcast, I decided I was superhuman and brought brand new boots, and I got terrible blisters. And so there was one day where I couldn't even, I was hobbled. And we said, okay, well, let's take a taxi a part of the way. Well, there were no taxis. We were in a small town. We found out we could get a taxi to come out from Siena and drive us, but it was like, we just wanted to cut our day in half from about 30 down to 15 kilometers. And that taxi would be like 250 euros. Wow. And we're looking like, what the heck do we do? And I'm like, I won't be able to walk the 30 kilometers. Like, that is the only certainty. We found out there is a pretty good bus network. The problem is where we had to go that day, it wasn't really that good. There was just one bus that left, I think, at like 6:30 in the morning. So we were up the night before and like kind of stressing, what are we going to do here? I don't think I can make it. And we finally found that bus network and took the bus. But It is. It is tricky if you need to get around, and if you have foot problems. Um, some places are great. Some places it's a bit tricky to find a bus that can take you to your next stop.
I want to dive more into the specific prep of the trek. So if I'm packing my backpack or I'm getting ready for this trek, what kind of advice would you give somebody in terms of the kind of gear that I would need, or any other kind of necessary skills that I should have before I start embarking on a really long walk like the Via Francigena?
Yeah. So, yeah, the piece of advice I'd give everyone is don't try and go as fast as you can. Go slower, especially if you're new to this. Do some half days. I've mentioned that already, but that's just the thing. My wife and I took out of it is, geez, we should have gone slower. In terms of gear, we went at the end of September and into October. The first half was super super sunny, and like the days were in the 30s, so that's around the mid 80s for Fahrenheit. Um, then it got rainy and we used a rain gear, and then it got a bit chillier, so the days would be kind of in the upper teens and probably in the 60s for Fahrenheit. And then at night it got chilly a couple nights where it was like we had every piece of clothing we had on. We carried all our gear, just we traveled pretty light, so we had I had a pair of shorts, a pair of trousers, 3 pairs of underwear, a short sleeve shirt, a long sleeve shirt, some stuff to wear to bed, a raincoat, and I think that's it. And then we'd just wash our stuff in the sinks. Every couple of days we'd wash our stuff. And so that worked out really well. One thing I did learn is I've always traveled just with like a Gore-Tex coat. And literally walking into Rome, we met this couple from France who had walked from Canterbury. So they had done the full thing.
Wow.
I speak French, and they were just happy that I spoke French because they hadn't met anyone who spoke French. And we had a great discussion. And so as we're walking into Vatican City, it starts to rain. And so I put on my coat, my wife puts on her coat, and they just look at me and they pull up these little umbrellas. And I've heard people say walk with umbrellas, but I've never kind of seen it in real life. And so here I am. It was kind of a warm day. I'm sweating like nobody's going to beat, I'm sweating all over. I'm soaked, my coat's, it starts to get wet on the inside. Meanwhile, this couple of French walkers just have their umbrellas out with their short sleeve shirts. They're loving it. And I just realized okay, I totally get the umbrella now. And so when we were in Japan, we literally bought trekking umbrellas from Montbel, because we had one of the guests on who said, yeah, this is the best trekking umbrellas. And we literally went to Montbel and just bought them. And so definitely, take some warm gear, take some cold gear, take a trekking umbrella. They're super light. It makes it really, really good. And yeah, it worked out really well for us.
And I'm also going to add too, I know we've had a couple of discussions in the past, previous podcasts where we talk about prepping for long distance walks and backpacking in Europe. And I think for anybody who's listening, wondering what else they could do to prepare, I would highly recommend that you check out that podcast, because I thought that was a very, very interesting conversation, because I learned a lot of things that were more specific than I realized. Like, for example, like the hiking umbrella. I think I've seen that only maybe once before by a guide I had in Nepal, and I just thought it was kind of so strange to see an umbrella on the trail. And after it did start raining, I'm like, yeah, I can understand the practicality, especially when it's in hotter weather. I understand.
Actually, two things that we ran out of is, I mentioned I had all these blisters. And so I was taping my feet up. I used a German athletic tape called Luco tape. It's incredible. I couldn't get any of that. So that was I haven't had blisters like this in 20 years. So I'm like, oh, I should have brought a full thing of Luco tape. I also ran out of every blister pad and every Band-Aid I had. And so I didn't think about my feet at all. And really, your feet are almost the most important thing. Also, we didn't realize how much clothes washing we were going to do. And so I have these little sheets of detergent. I ran out of those in the middle as well. So we were like buying soap and, mixing it all together. One thing that was nice actually is there was a few of the, like in some of the towns, there is no hotel. And so you're just staying in like somebody's house. A few of those had washing machines. So it was like just fantastic to go in there like, oh, wow, there's a washing machine and they've got soap. And so that was really nice towards the end to actually get our clothes washed, because hand washing is fine, but I don't think I can get it as clean and smelling as nice as the actual dish or clothes washer does.
So I know that there are so many treks in Europe, and I've also heard that there are so many ways to do these individual treks. And I know that you could do the Via Francigena, organizing it all by yourself, or you could also book a self-guided trip. Can you maybe tell me a little bit of the differences with both, and what kind of the advantages are of doing that one over the other?
Most of the time when people plan it themselves, what they do is they just kind of go with the flow. And so what they'll typically do is book the accommodations for, you know, the next day's walk when they get to town the night before. And what happens is each day you kind of plan, what am I going to do the next day? The benefit of this is you have complete flexibility. You can see how you're feeling, take on a hard day or a short day. The downside is because there's not a ton of accommodation, you get some long days. And so you end up having to do a 33-kilometer day instead of a 26 or 22-kilometer day. You end up having to go off trail for a few kilometers to find accommodation. And, you know, it's like the benefit of flexibility is, you know, you can kind of respond to what you feel. The downside is sometimes those days aren't very good. I think the other thing is what we found is we booked this quite late. And so, you know, if you went on booking.com, you know, maybe the top 15 hotels in some of the towns were all gone. And so there was a couple of nights where we stayed in places that were pretty rough around the edges. And so I think that's the risk you take, is really around the accommodations. Are you going to stay in nice places? Are you going to have to travel a lot? If you book a self-guided trip, you're pretty much going to stay in nice places in the right, you know, on the trail. Everything's going to be taken care of you. And the other big thing is you get luggage transfers. Now, you know, the last 25 years, the one thing we've gotten great at, especially backpacking with kids, is go as light as possible. So we were super, super light. So we actually didn't need luggage transfers. But if you try and organize luggage transfers yourself, they can be a total gong show. And so the benefit of a self-guided is you get that sorted for you. So it all kind of comes down to the type of travel you want to do, how much time you want to spend planning it, and how okay you are if things are different than, you know, what you'd expected. And when you do it yourself, more stuff can go wrong or maybe, you know, go right, versus, you know, when you book a trip, it's pretty much going to be what you expect.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'll say the idea of luggage transfer sounds pretty amazing. You know, I think I've done the, you know, the 80-liter, 40, 50-pound packs way too many times that I'm not for that anymore. And the other thing is, I'd like to say, it sounds like you know, you can really kind of get that local experience provided to you, and in some ways, you know, it's difficult to get that when you're doing, you know, your kind of own research, but having that perspective, you know, like you say, you can understand a bit more of what are the better places to be at, instead of getting, you know, having limited options when you're booking just the day before that. I mean, that in itself is pretty nice, because I think you want to enjoy everything about the trail, not just the trail itself, but also, you know, in the nights in between, and especially because it sounds like there's a lot to see, even after you arrive at your destination for the day. And I'm also hearing that the support that you get, because I imagine if something goes wrong, you know, like in the case with your foot, it's comforting to hear that you'll have somebody that you can talk to help you out in a pinch.
Yeah, I'm super lucky because we have partners all over Tuscany with 10 Adventures. So I actually reached out to a couple of them a couple of times because we had things we need help with. And they're, you know, yeah, obviously they'll help us. But hey, I run 10 Adventures, and we talk, you know, with these people twice a year about business matters. And so if I didn't have them, some of the things be like, I don't know how I'd solve this, because like when you're, you're like, some of the accommodations there was nobody there. It was, okay, here is, go to this door and there's a little lockbox on the door, click this and go inside, and you're in apartment 1. And like that, there was nobody you could message or anything, because it was like, these are small remote towns. And so yeah, if something happened in those towns, I don't know what the heck I'd do. Maybe I'd go to a restaurant and see if they could help me. But yeah, it really, really helped to have someone I could just message and saying, hey, I have this problem. Can you help me?
Now, for a hike like this, I've heard a lot about what I think what we'll be doing on the trail, what we'll be preparing for, and how to go about it. Who would you recommend this hike to if it was their first time doing something like this? What kind of advice would you give to a first timer doing a hike like the Via Francigena?
Yeah, so I think like everything, being in good shape beforehand, doing walks of similar distance. So for anyone who books a trip at 10 Adventures, the advice for our team is just check, find the longest day and make sure they've done a trip that long. If the longest day is on a bike is 80 kilometers, just make sure they've ridden 80 kilometers back at home. In this case, I think the longest day might be 22 or 23. There is one day where you got to walk that far. Just make sure that you can do that longest day. You've done it already, or really, really close to it. So that's the first thing is just, this is not an easy trek. There's some great walking options on 10 Adventures if you want to walk 3 or 4 hours a day. This is not that, particularly because you got the up and down. You've got a few stretches where you got to go a bit longer. The second aspect is this is a really great hike if you're into, you want to see the farms, you want to see the olive groves and the vineyards, and you want to eat, great Italian food and drink really good Italian wine.
So you're telling me there's no such thing as a couch to Via Francigena routine? I guess they just kind of cap it at a couch to 5K. So I probably should prepare a little bit when I'm looking to go these distances.
It's actually funny you mentioned that. And there was a couple from Quebec who we only met once. I don't know how. We only saw them once in the middle of our trip. We passed them one day. And then like a week later, they came and sat at a table where we were at. And they were doing the couch to fitness, and they'd lost 20 pounds. They'd started at Grand St. Bernard Pass, and they've been going for like 2 months or something. And he's like, I'm losing all this weight. So, these long distance walks, I always think it's like taking my uncle jokes about going to the fat farm. He was a kid. My grandparents sent him to a farm to lose weight. It's a bit like that. You go and you're outside all day, you're working out, you're eating big food, but you come back a few pounds lighter. So, you can get from your couch to the Via Francigena. That's a pretty good idea, actually, Mico.
I have a feeling that I know where the scales are tipping when it's a full day of walking, weighing up against of maybe some really great eating, some really great wines. I'm not sure where I'll land, but I have a feeling that I'm just going to be indulging more than I am going to be walking. So I think that's just what the trail is all about.
Exactly. It is. It's a feast for all the senses.
Are there any, challenges that are unexpected that you would want to, tell somebody who's planning their trip for the first time, and any ways that you can kind of prepare against those challenges to avoid them?
I feel like the road walking is what caused my blisters, just what other people have said. So I think the one thing, if you're not used to road walking, just really pay attention to your feet on those days. That's the one thing that, I wasn't used to. Everything else was just a delight. It was like getting dozens of little gifts every day with a great pastry or a great cappuccino or a great view or a wonderful lunch or, this incredible little village to explore was like, oh, what the heck have we found here? And just a ton of fun.
Okay, Richard. Well, I'm pretty sure you had me at coffee at the beginning of this conversation, but all the rest of it is really inspiring. And I think for anybody who's listening and feels inspired to look into the Francigena, can you give us a little bit of advice on how to start planning that trip?
Yeah. So one of the reasons my wife and I did this as well, which I didn't mention, is we thought this would just be a great trip to add to 10 Adventures. So we've been working with a couple of local guides, and we now have the route from the Great St. Bernard Pass in the Alps all the way to Rome. We've broken it up into a series of kind of 7 to 10 day walking trips. It includes luggage transfers. It includes all your accommodations, most of the time your breakfast as well. An app where you can figure out where the heck you are on the map and make sure you're following the trail. You can add rest days into it. You can do the whole shebang, and you can book that directly on 10 Adventures. And so all the stress of figuring out when to go, where to go, getting these reservations sorted out, getting your luggage transfers, all that can be taken care of. And you can find it. Maybe put the links in the show notes, Mico, as well. Just contact one of the team and they can talk you through the different options. We did the part from Lucca to Rome. Lucca's about, I don't know, I think it was like an hour outside of train from Florence. We did 18 days, I think, do it in 21 or 22 or 23. Throw in a couple days at the start and end for Florence and Rome. That's just a wonderful, wonderful adventure. And just a great way to explore this, beautiful part of the world.
Well, that sounds awesome, Richard. I'll certainly be looking to see if I can add that to my bucket list, because I think you've convinced me. But like I said, you did have me at coffee. The architecture, the culture, the food along the way, and just the charm of the towns that you've described. I think it has really sold me and has inspired me. Once again, thanks so much for having me on the podcast and getting me to and having me chat with you a little bit about this hike. I know there's so many across Europe, and it's kind of neat to hear it from your perspective when it's so fresh.
Mico, I really appreciate you joining. You started as a guest, now you're a guest host. It's great to have you, and loving the questions. And for me, it's always a joy just to think back on these trips I've done, and brings back many, many great memories. So thank you so much for doing this.
I'm happy to be here.
And thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back again next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.